right. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. So happy that I'm back here because we have some exciting news, and you're gonna start hearing new is gonna become a familiar voice in our podcast. Because I realized that for the longest time I've been doing this like solo episodes, and it was kind of boring. I mean, I was bored by just recording them because I feel like it was just like me talking and it was like a monologue. And I was like, you know what? I need to bring somebody that can just maybe moderate this conversation and to start kind of asking like engaging questions so we can kind of like, have a conversation that kind of flows a little bit better. So I decided to bring a very own content developer, Kenzie or Mackenzie. She goes by Kenzie. She's been working with us for the past, she actually just turned a year working with us, and she's been the mind behind a lot of the content that we create for Planos, which is basically our coaching company. And I was like, you know what? Let's just like bring you on the podcast and let's start kind of like recording and just have fun with it. And she's like, she got super excited because that's what Kenzie is. So Kenzie, welcome to the Nutrition Blueprint podcast team. So why don't you kind of share a little bit about you, because I don't want to like I don't want to spoil the fun there for you. So tell us just, or tell people like are listening to this podcast just a little bit about who you are, where you live, what you do for fun, just like all the fun stuff here.
Okay, great. I'm excited to be here. So I am a nutrition student and I live in Canada. And for Planos, as Andrea said, I've been working here for a year, doing lots of writing and making handouts for clients, and recently participating in our group calls, which has been super cool. And in my free time, I love staying active in any way, getting outside and hiking. Also love to read, and I'm big into mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah,
So yeah, those are the main
you're
things
on
about me.
the biggest meditation streak than the, like that I've ever like anybody I've ever met. I think we can probably consider you like level one monk right now.
Yeah, I think I'm getting there, like 250 days in a row, about.
So, and I'm guessing you're on the quest to kind of get to like 365 days. Is that really the main goal here?
Yeah, that's the goal, or beyond. But 365, I feel like is a pretty solid goal at this point.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we're super excited to have you on. And again, you guys are going to listen to Kenzie a lot of times now, a lot of our solo episodes. And Kenzie's just going to be basically our podcast sidekick here. So cool. So we figured today would be a good time we came up with like this like full lineup of great ideas of what we want to talk about over the next like few months and the way of us reaching our 200 episodes. We're still far from that, but we have great ideas in terms of that. So now like the you're gonna be continue to listen once a month, obviously our chit chat series with Tony and Desi. You're going to obviously hear some expert interviews with some guests that we're going to sprinkle here and there. I think we're going to have Lacey Dunn coming into the podcast pretty soon to talk about gut health. She's talked about thyroid. She's talked about reverse dieting. And now she's going to talk about gut health because she's an expert in it. She just wrote a book on it. And of course, we're going to also sprinkle this like solo episodes with me and Kenzie to talk specific areas and specific things that are going to be pretty valuable to you, that are going to be containing things such as anything that it could be applicable to you, or anything that is just more information, like stuff that we can nerd out a little bit on in terms of that. In today's podcast, we're also going to have our one of our coaches, very own coaches, Dana, joining our podcast, which actually she just entered the waiting room here in our podcast, because today in today's episode is going to be all about case studies in our most successful clients and what made them different. And we have a few different things that we're going to be covering with them. And I know Kenzie has some questions that she's going to sort of like lead the conversation. Before we get into that, we're simply going to kind of bring on Dana into the conversation and the podcast. So let's just kind of bring her in. And yeah, so we're going to be kind of chatting a little bit more about, again, like our most successful clients, including one of like Dana, because I definitely want to make sure that she kind of shares a little bit more about what she did and like kind of like her approach. I was like having a conversation today with one of our new clients that just joined your program, and I say Dana is kind of like a food relationship fixer. She's a person that is just in charge of just like helping people completely transform the way that they see food. So obviously that's why I wanted to bring her on as well to kind of share her experiences. But Kenzie, so what where are we starting?
So we're going to go client by client. I think we're going to break down 3 clients today. So maybe you can introduce the first person that we're going to be talking about. So maybe we could start with Sharon, since that's Dana's client.
Yeah, perfect. I think that would be a good kind of like person. So I'm just gonna give you kind of like a quick overview of who she is, well, she's still kind of part of the program, kind of where she started, and then what we'll do, Dana, is like we'll just simply kind of let you kind of like describe sort of like what are some of like the tactics and the strategies that you implemented with her, and at the same time also thinking like what are some of the things you did with her that maybe you wouldn't do with another type of client that maybe either more advanced or whatever when you compare him with other people. Because one of the main things and takeaways that we want to make sure we have from this recording and conversation is the fact that we don't just apply the same thing to different people. It's more about understanding what works for them. So quick background on Sharon. Sharon is a person that came to us, I think, about 3 months ago, and not I wouldn't say desperate, but very close, because she went to the doctor and she realized that she was on the verge of being put on a diabetes medication. She was pre-diabetic. Had a conversation with her and her mom. She comes from a Mexican heritage. I think she lives in New York, and very overweight, and she just really wanted to like lose some extra weight, but mostly for health purposes, wanting to kind of get that in check because she wanted to avoid medication at all costs. Now, I don't know everything that went on in terms of where she started and where she's at right now, so that's why I'm gonna let like kind of like Dana maybe kind of talk a little bit more about that first month, and really what were some of the things that she was kind of like experiencing when you had that first chat with her.
Yeah. So, like a lot of clients that we end up meeting, the beginning for me, at least, the process is just kind of trying to find out the how they got to where they are right now. And with so many people like Sharon, who's such a wonderful person and caring person, a lot of it just comes from not prioritizing themselves and their health. It wasn't necessarily them being, what are often heard as stereotypes of someone who's struggling with their weight, that she was not trying or that she was lazy or something like that. She truly was spending her days doing a lot of other things other than prioritizing herself. So that was the first step. Why have you not made this a priority before? Because we have to deal with that first, and making sure she knows why that's important. So that was first, and that was kind of eye-opening for her, which was a good thing, because she spends her days taking care of other people. Then we started talking about, well, what are the biggest struggles, so we can start to chip away one thing at a time. Oftentimes we meet clients and they want to go from 0 to 100 and just jump right in. And while we appreciate that, or I appreciate that approach, that also often leads to a very quick burnout, right? That I've put all this effort in, I see some results for a little bit, and once it starts to slow, I feel like I just want to walk off the track. I want to give up. So really starting to implement changes one thing at a time for her. She was interesting because, as you mentioned, she had some blood sugar regulation issues. So again, when somebody sees that, they might think, well, she might be eating junk food all day, or she might just be eating all day if she's in this weight category. But the reality is there's lots of people who actually undereat, or they eat in such sporadic ways that they eat large quantities of foods at once, right? And then they don't eat for a while, which of course can not only wreak havoc on your weight, but also on your blood sugar, right? So we need to get you on more of a consistent schedule, and trying to get some routine into your day where food is an actual priority instead of an afterthought, right? So many people prioritize other things. And even though food is a necessity in life, it's just, we're okay with putting it on the back burner. Right? I had to run this errand, or I had to call this person back. Well, food should come before all of those things, right? And we just happen to live in a society that's normalized putting that at the bottom of the list. So we would go through her day frequently and say, okay, and I would ask her, and we would pick times, where are you going to fit in a meal and a snack today? And when we first started doing that, she just didn't know, right? Because she was used to just kind of throwing it in wherever she could, maybe eating leftovers of meals from the children she watches during the day, or doing things last minute. And when we really started to plan and prioritize it, things changed almost immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously what kind of like led to those things. Were you gonna say something, Kenzie?
Yeah, so like if on the nutrition side of things, you started off with the meals, getting that consistent. What would you say on the mindset side of things was the major struggle to start?
I think for her, again, because she spends, and this will vary from person to person, and I feel like that's an important point to make, because while mindset is a really big piece of it, people have different thought processes around their bodies, their weight, their worth, all those things. So digging into that in an individual fashion is really important. For Sharon, it was mostly that she just placed everything and everyone above herself, right? So one, making sure she knows that in order to take care of these other people, she has to take care of herself. But also just remind her that she can do it. She was somebody who had been on a lot of diets and entered this type of scenario in somewhat of a defeated manner, thinking, well, wanting to believe she could do it, but having that little negative person on her shoulder saying, well, you failed so many times before, right? So also shifting the mindset of I can do it and I'm worth doing it. And so that's something we talked quite a bit about. And one way to kind of hammer that in every week was reminding her, why do you want to do this in the first place, right? And we would just talk about that every single week. So she never forgot the reason she was here.
Yeah, that's so phenomenal. And now talking a little bit more about the journey to where she kind of like is at right now. So one of the things that a lot of times like people in our, well, not only in our program, but in general, they kind of place a lot of focus on the scale and they place a lot of focus on the weight. And one of the things about this that it's fact that funny because we were talking about this yesterday, she's like, because she shared that with me the other day. It's like she's lost 18 pounds in the past 3 months. And your reaction was like, oh, that's so cool. That's so great. Because like she came, and again, like you're not like one of the things about that makes you such a great coach too, is like you try to get people to steer away from thinking that the weight is the only driver of progress. Right. So can you elaborate on that a little bit and why you were not even that aware like that she's lost all that weight?
We actually didn't talk that much about it, believe it or not. We did celebrate lots of victories. We talked about physical changes that were happening to her. She felt more energetic. She felt more rested. Her clothes fit better. She was more confident in her skin. But we just didn't tend to focus on the number. And the reason that is that often when people use that as the only driver, they allow it to dictate their mentality if it doesn't go the way they want it to go, right? So I've had clients before who tell me about their phenomenal week. I feel great. I'm planning my meals. I'm cooking at home. My clothes feel great. And then they get on the scale and let's say it hasn't moved, hypothetically. It's the same as the week before. It's like you took a pin and popped that balloon and it is completely erased or deflated all of those other successes. So I do think that's important. And the scale it can be an important measure, but if it's going to be the sole driver, and you're going to use this arbitrary piece of equipment to dictate your mentality in this process, you're probably going to get stuck more often than you need to.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what happened. We just simply turn and that's the thing for that is like we turn weight as a side effect of obviously working and changing completely the way that you live and your lifestyle altogether.
Right. And that's, I know why obviously we talk about the different pillars, right? The mindset's a huge one, movement, rest, all of those things are so important. And after you make all of those things a priority and they're aligned in the way they should be, the weight loss is a byproduct of that, right? So that is going to come. We just have to align all the other things throughout that process.
For people who do want to use the scale to measure progress, do you have some suggestions on how they can do that in a healthy way and not get sucked into those negative mindsets?
In the beginning of the process, actually, when I'll talk to new clients, we do first talk about what's a realistic goal, right? And the reason that we do that is because in our society, we are fairly often bombarded by very unrealistic sets of standards in terms of weight loss. You could turn on the TV right now and probably see something that's going to tell you can lose 15 pounds in 2 weeks if you just do X, Y, and Z. So right from the get-go, I say, this is what our expectation is. So that, if this is all you see, that's actually what it's supposed to look like versus what the TV is telling you. So really setting clear expectations at the beginning is the first thing. The second thing is that if I see people getting frustrated by the number of the scale and not recognizing or focusing on all of the other positive changes, we take a scale vacation. Say, okay, we're going to take a couple weeks, just take a break from it and then go back. And that very often goes very well, right? Because if nothing else, they notice how strong the attachment is to the scale, right? It's like somebody saying, I don't look at my phone that much. It's not a big deal. And then you physically take the phone away and every 10 seconds, they're checking, I don't have my phone. That is how attached some people are to the scale, right? And so once I tell them to take it away, it's a big kind of light bulb moment. Wow, this is really how much I was letting that control me. So the vacation pieces are very well. And also, once the vacation's over, they very often have then lost some weight, right? Because it hasn't been one day, it's been 3 weeks, right? So that's helpful too for mindset and for just realistic goal setting.
Yeah, and I think for those vacations, even just getting it out of the house is a good idea
Absolutely.
during that time, because if it's there, it's just you're right, it's like your phone. It's so tempting to just step on and be like, "Oh, how am I doing?"
Yeah.
And the problem is with that, like you said, if you have a healthy relationship with the scale and you're not going to let that number really affect you seriously, then it's no big deal. But many of our clients, it will immediately affect their mindset. And that's why, we have to be a little more careful on how we kind of dictate when to look at it.
Yeah, it creates more stress than it actually
Absolutely.
creates anything, and then that obviously kind of has an effect also on the body. So that's kind of like a huge thing into that. So where is like Sharon now? So what do you think like now? So we can kind of transition into a second kind of case study here. But where is like Sharon now, and what do you think is kind of what's helped her kind of turn into the person that she's at today? So of course she lost the weight, and like what are some of the things, like how's her lifestyle completely changed right now? To
So
where it is.
she has kind of improved on all of those different pillars, right? So we had started very small in terms of taking some personal responsibility in the kitchen for her movement and making little goals. So she now, where before her mom was preparing and her parents were preparing food, she's preparing a lot of her own food. And we started very small with that. But getting yourself involved in what you put in your body, huge change. And so that was really big for her. So she's now preparing the meals herself. She now sets times throughout the day to get that food. She schedules a movement every day like it was an appointment, and she makes sure she's getting adequate rest. This has led to her feeling more energized during the day, being more creative in the kitchen, and every time all these things kind of build upon each other, right? The more you do these things, the more you want to keep doing them because she feels her best. She's actually just about to apply to a new job that she's really excited about. She said it's the first time I felt comfortable in my skin in longer than I can remember. So I think it's just trying to chip away at each one of the pillars. And when they all come together, it's just, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where she's at.
That's so great. And I think just so we can kind of like explain a little bit more about what the pillars that Dana's talking about is like, those are the pillars that we typically teach in our program, which is one is nutrition. It's essentially the what, the how, the when, the why. And then but the other parts are going to be equally important, which is going to be your lifestyle, which includes how you sleep, how you manage your stress, how you plan yourself, how you organize yourself throughout the day. And then obviously there's the mindset component, which is, what is like your relationship with food? Like, what is like your approach to dieting? Like, what's like your background around dieting? And at the same time, understanding that there are things in around like, progression that you need to start to take a moment to step back and to celebrate. So we talk about gratitude and positivity, and of course movement, which is not just like training and exercise and pushing yourself to the limit, but rather just to make the habit of just move and not be as sedentary as like we typically have become in the past like few years or so. So just so you can kind of we're putting a little bit more context into that. So, but yeah, that's phenomenal to hear from her.
Yeah. And just putting joy in all those things, right? Not looking at movement as a chore to lose weight. We talked about what makes you happy when you move. Do you like to take walks outside in your neighborhood? Do you like to swim? Do you like to dance? What is going to bring you joy? And to stop kind of looking at exercise and movement as a form of punishment. And that's also a really important mindset shift for a lot of people.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love Sharon's story. That's great.
Yeah, she's the best.
So let's move on to our next case study here. So now we're going to be talking about Amanda. So Andres, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Amanda here.
Yeah. So Amanda is a client of mine that started, I think, closer to 5 months now. I think she's coming up to like the finishing up her sixth or fifth or sixth month. So Amanda, a very similar story in terms of like accomplishments. So it's crazy because the three people we're talking about lost a very similar amount of weight or up until this point, but different time frames and different kinds of like, places where they're starting, right? So Amanda also lost closer to like 18, like, 15 to 18 pounds up until this point, very similar to Sharon. It's taken a little bit longer, but it was a complete different kind of like, process. So Amanda was a person that she's a culinary director. And at the time that we started, she was unemployed because she was just leaving from a very toxic job environment that just took a massive toll on her. And when I'm talking about a massive toll, is it took a toll on her mental health. It took a toll on her like just ability to put herself first. And it literally kind of break havoc to the point that when we had our first conversation, she broke down in tears of how like crazy her life was at that moment. She was also building her own tiny home. I think she was living in Texas at the time, but she got a new job, and I think I was like get him confused. It's not Montana. I think it's Wyoming, or maybe it's the opposite. She's gonna like hate me for this. But she was like building this like tiny home with her husband. So of course, like she's just like, okay, I'm in a point that I want to like make a difference. I want to like, make a difference in my life. I want to like do things a little bit different. So what we did, and I needed, and one of the things when we kind of start with all of our clients is we need to figure out exactly where they're starting so we can meet them there. Right. And people have different personalities. So for example, like Dana is a person that doesn't, even though she knows how to use numbers for their clients' progressions, like, and she, like some of her clients typically may use them. I'm a person that the same way I can totally do more behavioral style, nutrition coaching and focus on those areas. But I'm also a person that my personality is typically driven by, because I like to use numbers. I'm just like a person that likes to kind of have control over those things. So when we're starting with our clients, we need to figure out what kind of personality drives them. And sometimes is that a tool that we need to use? So for Amanda, I started using that tool to start to like calorie macro track, like a lot of different things like that. And we realized that she loved it. Like she absolutely loved it because again, like she's a person that has a position that requires a lot of like calculations and different things like that. And she's like, this kind of gives me so much more control. And she was great at it. Right. So number one, obviously, it's defining what tool that we're gonna use for the job, right? So for Sharon was like the tool that we're gonna use is we need to kind of like start kind of like changing the way that you typically live. So it's more about creating the right like schedule and stuff like that. For me, the tool was we need to create this through a way to track and create an awareness. And the way that we're gonna do this is gonna be through macro tracking. So with her, very similar. We started and we realized that, she was not putting herself first, right? So she was obviously kind of like doing all these different things and not necessarily kind of doing that. And at the same time, massively under fueling. So when you were actually starting at a 240 pounds or so, and you're consuming 1200 calories or 1300 calories, there's no a whole lot of places to go down from there, right? And then mostly because of the fact that your body's just simply on, and I don't like to kind of think about starvation mode. It's just more about like your body's just adjusted to living in that kind of position. Your energy is like it's shot, all these different things are happening. That's exactly where Amanda was, right? No energy. She was getting like 15 to 20,000 steps because she was literally building a house for herself, like with her bare hands, working out and doing Peloton rides in the morning. So the first thing I said is like, the only way here is not down, it's up. So we started slowly incrementing the amount of calories she was consuming. And we slowly starting to add certain things like that. And with that, she started to lose fear around some of those different foods. And she fully trusted the process. At the very beginning, in the first 2 months, barely any weight drop at all. Because like she was kind of like keeping track of that because it helped her understand exactly what was happening. That's the other thing too that I was going to mention about weight loss or weight specific like focus. Some people have a good relationship with the scale and they don't really necessarily kind of get what's the word that I'm looking for, disappointed when they kind of see it up and down. It's more like, okay, this is just data that I'm kind of like looking at. And that's kind of what Amanda was. So the first 2 months, nothing. And that's literally who that person was at the very beginning stages, right? But then that's exactly what we kind of started doing at the very beginning. I just want to put a little bit of context on that, but I don't want to keep talking and unless obviously there's questions in terms of that.
Oh, that's good. I guess, was that the biggest challenge she ran into in the beginning, or what kind of challenges have come up for her along her journey?
So the challenges for her, it was eating enough. And he was like, it wasn't even like that she didn't really believe in it or believe that she needed to do it. It was just more about like, for example, her hunger was non-existent. And she would tell me, it's crazy because, and I think like then I can probably relate to this as well. It's like when we get clients that come to us with like this chronic dieting background, consuming 1,000 to 1,200 calories in this very inconsistent manner, where like they would just do that during the week, and then like a Saturday night comes in, and then they're just crushing like 4,000 calories in one setting. The one thing that they typically complain about is like, I just don't get hungry. And I usually say, well, it's most likely because of the fact that your body's just gotten used to just being like obviously the baseline. So what typically happens as a result of that is like when we start increasing calories, I celebrate the moment that they tell me I'm actually starting to feel hungry. And I would say like, holy crap, this is such a great win. So that was a big turning point for her when she started to become hungry, and that struggle obviously started to become easier. And Amanda is a person that went from consuming 1,200 calories to now eating anywhere between 2,000 to 1,200 to 2,200 calories, and completely improving that. Dana, what were you going to say on this?
Oh, so I was just going to say that that is a classic story that I've heard so many times. And I think because some people, if they enter a higher weight, than they want to be, their only thought process, based on, of course, what we're constantly being told is that, well, I just have to eat less I eat, that's what's going to get me the results I want. And so when we originally tell people that, oftentimes it's actually the opposite of that. It can be a little bit scary, so doing it step by step and trying to slowly increase that the calories and get that hunger and fullness cue back is a big win in itself. And I can't tell you how many times in addition to that, they'll say, well, I actually feel like I have some energy now. I was so tired all the time. And now I feel like I want to get up and move my body, right? Because eating less and having no fuel in your body, who wants to work out in that setting on an empty tank? And now all of a sudden they've eaten a little bit more. Hey, I feel like I can go take that walk or that dance class. And it's just, they see the connection between all of it.
Yeah. And it's just like the body just moves less. Like it's just not, it's like a normal, like kind of like, what's the word that I'm looking at? Like, it's just like, since you don't really have enough energy, like your body needs to try to preserve energy as best as possible. And I think that's kind of like the main thing that I think a lot of times like they kind of like experience in those cases. So that's really what we need to like, what we kind of like we're working on with her. So just so you can kind of like get a bit of an idea. So yeah, I know Dana, you had to kind of like go in a minute, so we can kind of continue a conversation with the other person in a minute. So, but I was just simply going to say that for Amanda, the biggest kind of breakthrough for her was that to be able to have energy to move, to be able to have energy for that. And then I just going to also mention one thing that is extremely important for her, which is lifestyle kind of choices that we made. So I said, she got a new job. And I said to her, Amanda, you can't treat this job like like you did the last one, because you created the environment that you would put yourself on in the last job that you had, which was like that toxic environment. It's not like you created it, but then you let people obviously take advantage of your ability to do all these different things like that. So she allowed it, like, like Dana just said here in the chat box, right? So I said, if you want to not ever go back to that, you have to go into this position in this new job with a different mentality. So what is one thing we did? We need to create the work-life balance that you never had before. Like you need to kind of like get out of there by the time, like, at 6 o'clock or whatever, make the time that you need to kind of get out of the restaurant so you can go home and meet with your husband. You need to set the time to be able to do that. You need to not be working on the weekends. Those are important areas and things that I feel like were key to kind of making the changes that she made. And that's where she's at right now. She comes home after 6 or 7 o'clock. She really kind of finds herself and realizes like, yep, it's a time in which right now I need to respect my time with my dinner, my husband, all those different things like that. So I'm going to shut it off. And weekends, no work. Right. And I told her like, what's happened? Like, did you get fired? Did anything happen? Nope. Like, my actual employer is actually like, yeah, you need to take your time. Like, you don't need to be here all the time. So that's a huge thing. And then just fast forward 5 to 6 months. Like when I mentioned like in the first 2 months, she didn't really drop any weight or barely kind of any changes, but she started to notice changes in her measurements. And at the same time, she's like, okay, and now the scale started to move, but she stopped paying too much attention to that. And now she's like breaking through like, 220s or so like that from starting at 245. And she's going to continue to accomplish those things on her own.
And that I think is so important to mention, the difference between a program like this and just kind of a commercialized diet where somebody's giving you kind of quote unquote a meal plan. And then that's the extent of it, right? When there's so much more involved than just following a plan on a piece of paper. And that's also what we kind of talk about a lot in the beginning. If we can't align all of these other things, you're never going to feel as good as you want to feel or can feel. We have to work, these all have to be intertwined to kind of get the end result. And as we said, the byproduct of that will be a weight change, right? But they all have to work together. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that my clients have mentioned, that I just have learned that this is just so much more about food, more than food. I'm sorry, that I wasn't sleeping. I don't have good relationships. I was overstressing myself. And yes, and yes, all of those things are huge factors. So it feels really good to get people to kind of open their eyes to that so we can fix all that as well.
Yeah, they come here wanting to lose weight and they realize that they needed so much more than that. So, Dana, we want to thank you so much for being here. I know I know you have a call that you have to jump into. So yeah, thank you so much for being here and sharing that. So yeah, we'll see you next.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Okay, so I guess now we can move on to our third client case study. And this one is quite a bit different from the other two. This is your client, Corey. So tell us a little bit about Corey.
So Corey, one of the things I forgot to mention at the very beginning is like, I typically try to to place our clients in different levels. And the levels that we place them in is going to be dependent on how much they know, where they're starting at, and what do we need to fix. Okay, so a client like Corey was a person that he's a health professional. He's a person that when you looked at him, he's like, he doesn't really need to lose a whole lot of weight. And it's interesting because he also lost closer to like 15 to 18 pounds in the process, right? He just wanted to go from a person that was like, fairly lean to the leanest that he could have been. Right. And those kind of clients and those type of people that want those results, these are people that don't have a weight problem, maybe, or that are not overweight, or kind of like, these categories, maybe like our earlier kind of case studies that we had, but they still want to kind of improve their body composition, right? They just still want to kind of like do the best they can be. So for those kind of clients, we need to start to figure it out. Well, like, where are we starting? So maybe for them, unlike maybe Sharon, that was still learning what carbohydrates were, like, can I have him as a diabetic? For Corey, it's just like, yeah, I know what carbs, proteins, and fats are, right? Now it's more about like focusing on the details. So in that kind of client, for him, for example, we raised the bar a little bit higher and we use different tools for the job. In this case, obviously with him was also macro tracking, but it was macro tracking with a little bit of like, more specificity in it. And it's like, okay, like we need to kind of establish specific goals for days that you work out. We need to maybe like lower those things down a little bit on days that you're not working out. When we're putting somebody through a calorie deficit, right? The body typically takes, a hit. Your body doesn't like to do that, especially when you're sort of fairly comfortably, or your body's comfortable where it's at right now. And you try to put it towards like that kind of stress, because weight loss is a type of stress for the body, because when you're not fueling your body enough, your body starts like ringing alarms. It's like, hey, what's going on here? Like, there's not enough fuel. So Corey was at that point at the very beginning. Like, I just want to lose and get as lean as possible. I want to go from like a 17, 18% body fat to sub 10% body fat. Like, what is it that we need to do? So that's obviously the beginning starting line for him.
Okay. And with a client like that, when they get started, do you find they struggle with their hunger levels at all? And what do you typically do about that?
So typically when they're like, for example, in the case of Corey, it's like a Corey, which is like no really like a lack of awareness how much he was eating. So what I typically do for them is like, I have them track what they eat for 7 days and figure out exactly what the average is. And for him, like, he would be days in which he would consume like 1,700 calories, but there would be days in which he would consume like 2,800 calories. So very imbalanced. In cases like that, this is not a typical client that it's constantly under fueling. It's probably a client that typically just maybe through social life with alcohol and like all kinds of different things like that, they typically overeat without not realizing. That's usually what happens to me when I start to kind of gain a little bit of weight. I realize that I'm eating a little bit more often than usual. So it's not a hunger cue issue. It's just more about organization and really understanding how much you're consuming and how to create control around that for him.
Okay. And in terms of the movement pillar, was there anything specific that you did with Corey?
Yeah. So for clients like this is like somebody that, sure, like we sometimes with some clients like this, we need to do focus on the basics. Like, hey man, like we need to kind of get you to just get a little more steps in on a daily basis. But usually at this level, they're people that are following specific kind of training regimes. So they either have an exercise program that they're following through, or they have a trainer that they're working with, or they have a specific, but they usually are people that are training for at least 4 days a week in a structured exercise routine. When you compare that, for example, with somebody like Sharon, who we needed her to move more, like it's a complete different thing. So for Corey, it's like, okay, here are some of the things like we need to kind of establish this. And actually, in part of our program, we do work with one of our personal trainers, Sergio, and he programs for some of our clients. So that's exactly what we did with him. So I said, like, get in touch with this guy, tell him exactly what your goals are, and he's going to build a training program that's going to be designed for that. But I still focus on the basics, and I would say, you know what, let's start to kind of get more steps in, just to make sure that you can kind of get a little bit of extra calorie expenditure. Because what I usually tell my clients is like, do you want to starve yourself in terms of food, or you just simply want to like maybe incorporate a little extra movement so calorie expenditure is higher? Every single time, nobody's going to tell you like, I just want to eat less. No, everybody's going to be like, I prefer just to move more. And that's the main idea behind that, to kind of create that calorie deficit we needed to create for him.
Yeah. So you said he lost about 15 to 18 pounds. Was that fairly consistent, or what did his journey look like over the time that he was working with you?
And clients like that is typically very consistent when they're doing the job, right? When they're being compliant, which compliance is the other thing too. A compliant client is somebody that you don't have to, be chasing around and saying like, hey, like you're not submitting your check-ins, or hey, like you're not even logging your food right now, or all the different things like that. When we agreed that was the goal, right? So in a case like that, then I can't know what's happening. I may have clients, for example, that they do great Monday through Friday, and Saturday rolls around, and then they have like a binge drink type of like environment, and then they're asking themselves like, why am I not seeing results? And I say like, well, it's because of compliance. And again, like we need to maybe like explore deeper things that we're not kind of working with. So in the case of Corey, it was like it was pretty expected. If you do this kind of job, it's just simply more going to be like making the adjustments, which is the other part too. you know Weight loss is not a linear process, and adjustments need to be made, particularly when a person that is already kind of lean, to make sure that you're not, like affecting your metabolism in a negative way. So one of the things that we talked about throughout this process, and this is like, obviously, let's just obviously talk about the good, the ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I can actually compare this to myself. When we're trying to reach a specific goal like that, and a percentage of body fat that is so low, there's going to be consequences and sacrifices that need to be made. When we're in a calorie deficit for so long, one of the things that happen, particularly in males, is your hormones can actually start to be affected, including one of the most important ones, which is testosterone, right? And it happens to a lot of guys, especially when they're just like depriving themselves of too many calories, which is your testosterone level starts to go down, your libido starts to go down, your sex drive starts to go down. And that's just simply a consequence of just being so restricted. And when you see a lot of those guys that kind of compete in bodybuilding shows and stuff like that, this is a price that they have to pay, right? Low energy, hunger all the time, and all different things like that. And though Corey was not really in that same kind of like arena, he did kind of get to experience some of those different things in terms of that. So that's why weight loss and fat loss is not something that we need to do indefinitely, right? When do we need to pull the plug, and when do we need to maybe sometimes like increase the amount of food that you're consuming, so we don't really kind of like experience some of these consequences. So this is when we introduce what we call advanced nutrition strategies, which is what I did with him. What are those? Like, advanced nutrition strategies are simply going to be adjustments we make to their nutrition week to week that are going to help him avoid plateaus. So some examples, and I have talked about some of these in the podcast before. Reverse dieting, which is simply increasing your calories for 1 to 2 months before we jump into another fat loss type of phase. Other times it's including refeeds, which is simply going to be like higher carbohydrate days that you're going to be including in some days. That way you kind of like, shock the body a little bit, or at least you kind of give yourself a boost of energy so you can complete your workouts in a more efficient way, right? So these are all tools that we're using in a tool set to help him not necessarily kind of hit those moments in which like your sex drive is low. It kind of did in some cases because of the fact that we did that for too long. And that's obviously me as a coach to just not let that happen, because when you're like trying to like lose weight for like 6 months and like really kind of pushing it, that's a big thing. But the other part too is like compliance. If somebody's not compliant, it's hard to implement some of those different kind of strategies that I'm just mentioning here.
Okay. And in terms of mindset, were there any kind of mindset challenges that you ran into?
Big ones, which is how to push through when things become hard. There is a cost to getting lean. And the question that you need to sometimes ask yourself is you're willing to pay it. Now, I'm not talking about the person that is overweight that needs to lose a few pounds. I'm talking about the person that is already lean. You look great, like everything is cool. You just need to like go for that six pack. You're trying to kind of go for that definition, for like that like marked abdomen and all those different things like that. There's a cost to need to be paid, and usually the cost of it's simply not going to be sustainable over time. So getting to like a sub, like for men, like getting to like under 10% body fat and keeping it that way, it's so hard on not only on your body but also on your life, right? It requires a specific. So I at the lowest that we ever kind of gotten Corey to go to, like he couldn't like eat out that often, right? He couldn't do these different things like that because it was just so difficult to be able to manage those things. And sometimes we could have, but it was like, okay, like, do I sacrifice this instead of that? Like, because I meal out is going to be like at 800 calories. And not necessarily that that's what he was consuming, but like he gets so limited throughout the day. So mindset wise, like you push through a lot of different barriers. And then a lot of times you're like, I don't want to be done. I don't even know why I'm doing this in the first place. Right. But that is a cost that you have to ask yourself if you're willing to pay. And me as a coach, I just need to ask, like, are you willing to kind of go through that process? And do you understand the consequences of sometimes what is that going to look like? And in terms of that, it's like, yes, I'm willing to do it. I was like, I don't even know. I was like, I don't think so. Okay, then we can kind of do this in a much easier and slower way. You may not get to like that, like marked, like perfect 6-8 pack that you're trying to kind of get to, but you're gonna get in a pretty close way and look great, and then kind of keep it to a point where it's sustainable, which is actually what my personal life, that's exactly where I'm at, where I like the way I feel and look, but I don't have like a marked like full six pack. I just essentially, and that's okay with me because I know what it takes to get to that point.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone, and I think it really depends on that each person's unique mindset and what they're really trying to accomplish, what makes them happy in their lives.
Yeah.
Are there any people you would say that this is not for, that you wouldn't work with to get to this kind of point?
So people that just like they're a different kind of position in their lives. I always kind of say like people compare themselves a lot to like something that they accomplished when they were younger. I had a client dude like, oh, I competed in this bodybuilding competition, and like, and look at my pictures, look what I look like, and that's exactly what I want to go. And I usually come to that to her, and I said, but look at your life now. You're married, you have a husband, you're trying to buy a house, you have a job. Before, I don't know what she was doing. Like, and this is just an example, but I'm like, maybe you're going to school and like you had all this time in the world. You were just simply focusing on studying, and like the rest of it, you could be able to be in the gym for 2 to 3 hours and be so crazy focused on like the stuff that you were eating. You're not at a point in your life where you can afford to do that. It's not like it's just so energy consuming and energy draining, and some people do it still. It just, a lot of times is like the life in which you're living. So for the people that this may not be for, it's going to be people that are just not, that are not willing to sacrifice so much in terms of getting to that level of leanness, because it's just simply not sustainable. Now if you're talking about like kind of getting lean and getting to like really kind of like low fat percentage and stuff like that, it can be done, and it doesn't have to be too complicated. It also depends on the person. Some people like, and that's the unfairness of obviously the human genetics, which is you will have somebody that just reduces eating out and just eat at home every day, and then boom, they have a six pack, and they didn't really do anything else. They didn't track calories, they didn't do none of the different things like that. That's just like the reality. You're gonna see people like that all the time, or people that eat out all the time, and you see them and it's like, how is this person looking like this? That's just how the way it's going to be. It just really depends on where you're at, your background, and really where you want to go. What's going to define whether or not this is going to be the right situation or the right approach for that.
Yeah, I think
So
the genetics is a huge thing. And also the life seasons that you were talking about. Like you're going to go through different seasons in your life, and your body isn't going to look the same in all of those seasons. And being okay with that and prioritizing your body during certain seasons and maybe not as much during other ones.
correct. So yeah, and I think that's kind of like the main kind of summary from this, which is really the main goal that we wanted to have today in this conversation, is the reality that everybody's completely different when it comes down to their goals. And one of my huge and most important and biggest pet peeves, it's seeing programs out there that are sold exactly the same to two different people with two different backgrounds. So imagine if the same kind of cookie cutter program that I did with Amanda, like, not mine is not a cookie cutter program, but let's say, for example, I would take her program and I just turned it into a cookie cutter approach, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing word by word. And I did it with Sharon. Perhaps she would have felt overwhelmed because it's not a person that understands even numbers or hates math anyways. Like maybe Sharon would be able to kind of follow through with that in the first month, but she'll get tired of it. She'll get exhausted, and she didn't work in the most important things that she needed to do. So a lot of times is like really understanding the crowd that you're working with, so we can understand how to make like the choices. 3 different people, same amount of weight that they dropped, same amount of weight, different time frames, different situations, different places, right? So it can be done. It just needs to be tailored to whatever the person is and who they're trying and what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, hopefully this is helpful. Anything else to add? I don't know if obviously if there's anything on your end that you wanted to kind of like chat about to just kind of wrap it up for you for today.
I think that's everything for today.
Cool.
It was really interesting hearing those stories, and I think for me as a nutrition student, it's great to hear you talk about those kind of experiences. So I really enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
I think you're gonna like, when you finish like, your school, like you're gonna be like, I already know how to do this.
Yeah, I would be ready to go.
I'm ready to go. So that's awesome. Well, for people listening to this podcast, thank you so much for being an avid listener. If you guys like resonated with these messages, and you guys are on that place where you're just like, you don't know what to do, and you're like, I'm totally in that Sharon, I'm totally in that Amanda, or I'm totally in that Corey that you're talking about and describing that, but you don't know how to get to that goal that you're trying to kind of get to. That's what we're here to help and support, which is exactly why we created the nutrition makeover method, which is designed to help people navigate through those pillars, not only so they can get to their goals, but they can stay there. Like I just literally got off the phone call with somebody which I told him, like, I don't give a crap about how much weight you lose. I give a crap more about your ability to be able to maintain and sustain that. So that's what we're here for and for you. And it's very easy for you to be able to apply for that. We're gonna leave a link in the show notes in which you can just kind of click on it to apply. Or you can simply send us a message on Instagram or Facebook, and we're gonna get in touch with you to kind of maybe perhaps get on a phone call so we can chat a little bit more about where you're at and where you need to go, and whether or not we may have a solution for what you're trying to do. And if we do, we'll talk about what that may look like. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. And again, welcome Kenzie as a official podcast sidekick for the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. You did great. You passed today with flying colors.
Thank you.
So super cool. All right, guys, we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for showing up and for listening in. Have a great, wonderful rest of your week. Take care.